Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fourth edition of AGA Sessions, where we we focus on people at their home. Today's guest is Carrie Swift, who is a public speaking coach, and she's the founder and owner of Love Public Speaking. So I think it would be a really interesting conversation. We're joined by Carrie Swift, who's a public speaking coach from Love Public Speaking. We started discussing how the recent lockdown has changed the way Carrie works and the way she coaches people, and whether her methodology has changed. And I was about to ask about her clients and how they had to adapt to this new change, from meeting Carrie face to face, and from her coaching them about body language and the way they move, to suddenly being limited by sort of a picture frame, which is the Zoom screen. So Carrie, how did your clients had to adapt? Was there any resistance in the beginning, or were people immediately engaging?
So at the beginning, everybody just put everything on freeze. So all the training that we were doing was postponed, and it was that way for a few weeks. And then just recently now, we're getting a lot of requests for virtual training. And actually a lot of the training works really well virtually. We have to adjust it so that we're working with smaller groups, but actually one-to-one training works really well because you can do speaking exercises over Zoom, and you can watch yourself and play it back. And we can also do group training over Zoom, so people will we can get them to work in pairs, and they can do speaking exercises and they get feedback from the trainer. And then we're also doing things like we are working with clients to help them run their own public speaking workshops where they deliver them themselves over Zoom. So they are practicing skills like impromptu speaking. But you're right, it is a different kind of presenting, because obviously normally body language is a really big part of presenting, and as well as voice, but actually a lot of the same stuff still applies. So we're teaching the same techniques, but there's certain things you have to do differently. Like, for example, when you're on a Zoom call, and if you were doing something like leading a meeting, then you have to use more signposting. So you have to signal in a stronger way who speaks when and whose turn it is to speak, and you have to chair meetings in a way that's quite authoritative to make sure that it all works and people don't talk over each other.
Yeah.
So I guess, we're teaching a lot of the same training, but it's all adjusted for this kind of communication.
And will there be a point where, so for instance, if someone is completely new to public speaking and he would join you now, whenever public speaking in the real kind of world returns, will the transition be smooth, or are there any issues that are completely different?
I think, to be honest, it is less pressured speaking in this way because we've got this geographical distance. You can't quite see everything. You can blame the technical hitches. Yeah. I think that, when you are presenting to a live group of people compared to presenting on webcam, it feels different. I think that people generally find that more nerve-wracking. I think the issue actually with speaking on webcam is that it's not particularly nerve-wracking. It's really easy to feel distance from everybody, and it's kind of the opposite problem, that you can become really low energy in how you present. So what we're saying to people when we're teaching them about how to speak on webcam is you have to work that much harder to engage your audience, you know, to get musicality into your voice, to speak really clearly, to be positive, to keep a really pacey kind of cool. So it's a slightly different set of advice. And then when we're working with them in person after lockdown, it will be more like, well, let's talk about how you stand. So we talk about something called the power pose, which is you know, making sure that you're standing tall and your weight's evenly distributed. And we talk about how you use the stage, and we talk about the way that you interact with your visual aids, you know, not looking behind you too much if you're working with a PowerPoint. So it's slightly different, but the things that are the same are things like how you use your voice, and you know, trying to be engaging when you present, and speaking about 20% slower than you normally would, and bring some warmth to your topic by being a little bit smiley but not too smiley. So there's some crossover, but definitely the body language stuff will have to come after lockdown.
Cool, thank you. As architects, we're obviously interested in space, and so I guess my next question is to do, you touched a bit on our appearance. I'd like to take it a bit further and talk about the room where we're at, and especially our background. I mean, I've got sort of books behind me. Your background seems quite sort of minimal.
Very minimal.
Are there any tips or advice on that? Because I guess one issue that can be a problem is because you're speaking publicly in sort of a virtual world, but the danger is that you could reveal something of your private life if you're not careful. So the positioning yourself in the room is very important. What sort of background is behind you? Or is it okay to show some indication of your private life, or no? Or is it up to the person speaking? I guess it's also whether the background should be completely flat, or should it have some sort of depth in it? So be happy to hear your view on it.
I think it's really interesting, because it does feel like people are making a statement with whatever they've got in the background. It's really interesting watching people appearing on the BBC, and a lot of them have got what you've got, which is bookshelf. I think that makes a really nice, colourful background. I mean, I don't know if you can see here, but so what I've got in the background is quite a plain background. I've got a piano over there. I've got a plant. It's pretty neutral. It's not really sharing that much about me. That's not necessarily the right way to do it. I think it's sort of up to you, and it's up to you to judge the tone of, you know, what is the relationship with the people that you have on that call. I personally feel that if there are a load of family photos in the background, it's a bit too intriguing. You know, if there's a lot of personal stuff, I find it slightly distracting. And it is kind of like having a view into that person's world that you don't normally get, which you may or may not want to share. You know, I think in some cases it's quite useful to have your kind of work persona, and it's useful to have that slight professional distance. But I think it's really about, I think it's about judging the situation. But I mean, what I would say is that I think we've all seen a lot of cases where people are perhaps not, you know, in some ways it's like we're deformalizing meetings through doing them from home, and sometimes people are not bringing that professionalism to the call. And I think, you know, it's up to them. But for me personally, I feel like I quite like coming to the call feeling as if I'm not necessarily here in my sort of home life, but I am here in the study, kind of in work mode, dressed for the call, and not necessarily giving away too much about my personal life. But that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, as you were describing it, I remember there was this, I think it was on Sky News, where they interviewed through Skype an expert on something, and that interview went viral because his daughter came in the background and started making faces and so on.
Oh yes, I remember seeing it.
So
I mean, I suppose poor guy couldn't help that, could he?
Yeah.
If that happens, it happens. What can you do? You may try not to make too much of a deal with it and just carry on.
But I guess it's a natural thing, and it just gives. Yeah, we're in this virtual world, and I think incidents like that maybe bring it down to something a bit more personal. But that's an obvious challenge, I guess, now for everyone.
I think that's okay.
Working from home and having the kids around and so on. How important is what you wear? If I guess if it's a very business-like meeting, should people still wear like a jacket or?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Or is it better to be more casual-ish?
It's a really good question, and I'll not forget the first time I had a big business meeting with 40 people that I normally go to a networking event with, and the networking event you have to go suited and booted, and it was so funny on this call because half the people turned up in a full suit, and the other half of the people turned up in joggers. And the people that were in a full suit at some point during the call admitted that they were wearing the pajamas on the bottom half. And I think, the conclusion that I've drawn here is that a suit's something you'd never wear at home. So perhaps it looks a bit unnatural wearing a full suit. But for me personally, I find it a lot easier to get into work mode if I am dressed sort of vaguely professionally. So, I'm probably not going to sit there in a tracksuit because apart from anything else, it somehow just feels harder to get into that sort of work persona. And I also think, as we were saying before, there is something to be said about what do you want to project on these calls?
Yeah.
Do you want to keep that kind of level of professionalism, and how much do you want to show of your private life?
Yeah.
My personal view is that something in the middle of a suit and a tracksuit is probably appropriate for the home environment. What do you think?
I agree. Yeah. Thank you for that. I know from my experience of doing a bit of public speaking and then also meeting clients for the first time, you get a bit of a rush of an adrenaline, especially with public speaking. It is stressful, and you your heart starts beating. But it also sets you in the mood. Do you have any advice in terms of kind of mental preparation, or is that at all important before a public kind of Zoom meeting or lecture?
Absolutely, before a Zoom call. Yeah, I mean, if I'm about to go and present a webinar to 100 people, I will still have a bit of a ritual that I would use if I was presenting to 100 people in real life. And that would be that, I'm making sure that I'm dressed the part, that I've got everything, that the room set up as I need it to be. I'm probably going to run off some adrenaline by circling the house a few times. And I'm going to make sure that I've kind of got my notes there and I've got everything that I need to bring all my energy to it. I think preparation is really important. I mean, if I was really worried about something, I would go a little bit further and I would do things like visualization exercises, which is something that we offer to our clients, which is kind of like a meditation where you would run through almost in real time what it's like to deliver that talk really successfully in a way that you really enjoy it and it gets really positive feedback. So I think all the same stuff applies if you're really nervous. But perhaps, as I mentioned before, I think part of the problem is almost the opposite, that we don't feel so nervous in these situations and we can be feeling a bit low energy, in which case we have to work a bit harder with things like trying to bring the call to life by being extra engaging and finding ways to interact with people and having really good, well thought out content.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. Before we end, we still have a few more minutes. If anyone has questions for Carrie, please type them below. There was a comment earlier. I'll just scroll back. Build Pass UK, if you're still with us, they were saying, I was on one the other day and they had a building project running in the background. It was really off-putting.
Yeah, I mean, not ideal. Perhaps it's something that you can't help, but I think it's so hard to stay engaged on these calls. You know, it really is because of the geographical distance. I think whatever you can do to not distract your viewers with extra stuff that's going on will help you to get your message across. I mean, when I told you about that call that I was on the other day, where there were lots of us and some people in suits and some people were in joggers. There was one guy who forgot he was on camera, so I think he made the mistake of hiding the self view, which, you know, if you've seen the videos going viral, can be really disastrous. And he did get changed on camera. Luckily, he only took his jumper off, but he got changed on camera, and then he was bringing his kids in to have a look at all of us on the camera, and he obviously had forgotten that his camera was still on, and it was just so compelling to watch to follow his story that I didn't hear anything that the actual speaker said for their presentation. So yeah, I think minimum distractions are preferable.
All right. Build Pass UK has another question. What would you say to someone like me who wants to do something like Insta, Facebook Live, but needs a push to do it?
That is such a great question. So it is so hard to make yourself do these things. And I think that people think that those of us who are doing it find it easy, and we don't. You know, I mean, this is exactly what it's like when you go on your public speaking journey. You know, you start small, and what I would really say is that it's just about saying yes to everything that you can, and understanding that you're going to be on the edge of your comfort zone, and that feels uncomfortable, but that is what growth is. Yeah. And actually, the really important thing is to kind of lower the bar and to say, do you know what, I'm going to give this my best shot. And it might not be the most articulate that I've ever been, but I know that the only way that I can improve is to actually do it, and to do it with a live audience. So I'm going to forgive myself for being a little bit imperfect, and actually I'm going to value the opportunity to practice. And I'm just going to say yes and do it. So I would really, really encourage you to do it, because once you get started, it just doesn't feel like such a big deal anymore. And the more sort of public speaking events or live video events you can fit in to a space of time, the less of a big deal they feel like. So you don't want to do kind of one a month, you want to do 3 a week. and that is how you really desensitize, and you start to relax about it. And then of course, as soon as you start getting relaxed, you start getting better as well.
I thank you, Carrie. I completely agree, and I can share from my own experience. These live sessions are completely new to me. This is the fourth one. It's been, yeah, it's a huge challenge for me. I'm not that outspoken, but you just have to kind of jump in and do it. And I think the most important thing is sort of have fun.
Absolutely. And to offer quality content. You know, what
Yeah.
people are not looking for it to be perfect. It doesn't matter if we have some technical glitches or anything like that. It's actually, that's really interesting to watch, and it's authentic. You know, actually what's important is more like what you're offering your audience and it being useful to them.
We had another interesting question from Wheel Thing. What are some of the issues people are facing working from home, and how can you help with your webinars? I'll just give a quick, because we had some technical issues before, and I see some new people that have just joined. Just a recap, we're speaking to Carrie Swift, who's a public speaking coach from Love Public Speaking, and we're discussing how her coaching has changed over the past 8 weeks since lockdown, and she's offering advice for people on how to tackle Zoom conference calls and going live. So back to you, Carrie.
So I think that question was also about what the other challenges that people are having. And actually, it's things like not knowing what the appropriate level of engagement is with colleagues, and kind of not knowing things like how to be visible without being annoying. So we're doing quite a lot of webinars around things like personal branding remotely. So how you kind of gauge what's the right channel to use to speak to my boss or to speak to my colleagues. What's the right tone to strike in this WhatsApp conversation versus when I'm talking to somebody on Microsoft Teams. Now that I'm using more LinkedIn a bit more, what should that look like? What kind of trail am I leaving online? And how is that going to affect me in future? So we're doing a lot of work around kind of online personal branding, as well as looking at actual communications and how to present on video calls. And the other area that we're doing a lot of work on is actually resilience, because people respond really differently during this period. And some people find it incredibly stressful. And so we're doing work around how to manage your thinking, and I suppose sort of how to stay positive through this period. And then most recently, we've just got a really interesting request around, somebody said, can you do a workshop on resolving conflicts between those people who have been furloughed and those people who went to war during COVID-19. And this is an HR client of ours who said that they expect there to be some conflict there. So we're just having a think about how we're going to tackle that one.
That's interesting. Another question from Build Pass. Carrie, do you have a link? So how can people get in touch with you?
Yes, so we are at www.lovepublicspeaking.org. I realise now that my Instagram profile doesn't have a photo because I set it up about 10 minutes ago. But I am on LinkedIn, Carrie Swift, and Love Public Speaking is also on Facebook and Twitter. So we're doing lots of free video content at the moment with tips on things like how to improve remote working from home, and resilience and personal branding remotely. So that's all on the website.
Great, thank you. If there's any other comments, please, or questions, just write them down below. Otherwise, for summary, Carrie, would you like to say something, or
Sure. Well, I could say my biggest sort of lockdown lesson, which is the one about just doing these things that you find difficult. So it's just coming back to that the question that we had earlier, which is there's so many people that really hate speaking on camera, and there's people that won't turn their cameras on. There's people that would rather be locked in than do video calls because they don't want to look at an image of themselves. And there's lots of people that have their own businesses and aren't using video. And what I would say is that this is such a great time to just do that stuff, because it's really, really acceptable at the moment to put out videos that are really amateur, and people don't mind, but actually it's so worth it, because it's such a great opportunity to be able to get your business out there, or to grow your kind of personal brand if you're employed and you might be looking for opportunities in the future. So, you know, my biggest message to people is always just whatever you find hard and scary, actually just do it, because it's so worth it. But just don't set the bar so high that you beat yourself up about it if it's not absolutely perfect.
Cool. Thanks very much, Carrie, and thanks for joining us today. It was a really enjoyable chat. Thanks for everyone else who joined. Please join us next week. We've got an interesting lineup for the next couple of weeks. So we'll publish further information on Instagram and LinkedIn. So have a pleasant evening and enjoy the long weekend.
Thanks, Amos. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.